The morning I rode out of Murren's crossing with Sira beside me, the border wolves ran alongside us for 6 miles before they finally stopped and sat in the snow and watched us go. All 11 of them. I had never seen border wolves do that for a living person. I had seen them do it once before, for a lord who died protecting the eastern pass, whose body we carried home wrapped in pine boughs. They ran with us then in silence, just as they ran with us now, and when they finally stopped and sat in a line at the edge of the tree line and watched, I did not look at her. I did not trust myself to look at her yet. I looked straight ahead at the road south and I said nothing, because there is nothing in the language of kings adequate to what I owed her, and I was not yet ready to try. That is where I will begin, not at the beginning but there on that road, because it is the image that lives in me most clearly when I think of what we cost her. 11 wolves in the snow. 6 miles of escort for a woman who had been sent north with 2 blankets and a single candle stub and told not to return. Now I will go back. I was injured in the Eastern Pass in the 3rd week of autumn. A border skirmish with a raiding company out of the Morville territories. Nothing that should have been serious. Nothing that required me to be present. And I was present anyway because that is the kind of king I had become by then. One who rode to the edges of his own kingdom to prove to himself that the edges still held. The wound was not from a blade. It was from a horse that was not mine, coming down badly on ice and the fall that followed. I broke 3 ribs. One of them punctured something it should not have punctured, and I spent 3 weeks in the border garrison at Edris Hold between consciousness and something that was not quite sleep and not quite death. My counsel was told. My men were told. And the kingdom, which had been watching for 2 years for any sign of weakness in its king, was told nothing officially and heard everything unofficially, which is always worse. In those 3 weeks I was not present. I could not speak, could not sign documents, could not receive petitions. My council governed in my name. Lord Edric Vane, who was my senior lord and had been my father's before him, chaired every session. He was a careful man, Lord Vane, careful in the way that certain very intelligent people are careful, which is to say he was careful on behalf of himself first, and the kingdom second, and the king, a distant third. He had been careful for 40 years. He had survived 4 administrations through that carefulness, and he had every intention of surviving mine. It was in that 3rd week, when the garrison physician told my men I would either recover or I would not, and there was nothing more to be done except wait, that Lord Vane called a special session of the full council and introduced a motion concerning Sira, daughter of Lord Aldrich Thornson, who had been the lord of the southern pasture territories until he fell into debt and out of favor 3 years before, and whose lands had been folded into the crown holdings. I will tell you what Lord Vane said. I was told later, word for word, because the garrison aide who attended that session wrote everything down and gave his notes to my wolf master Gareth, who kept them, and gave them to me the day I was well enough to read. Lord Vane said that Sira Thornson had been seen twice in private conversation with the king in the 6 weeks prior to my injury. He said that the king had looked at her in a way that suggested an attachment. He said that an attachment between the king and the daughter of a disgraced lord, a woman with no lands, no pack standing, no wolf of her own, would be destabilizing to the succession and damaging to the kingdom's alliances. He said all of this in the measured, careful voice he had been using in council chambers for 4 decades. He introduced a motion to have her removed from court and relocated to the northern territories under a directive that she not return without council permission. The motion passed. 4 lords voted for it, 2 abstained, and 1 voted against it, old Lord Farron of the Western Marches, who was 81 years old and had nothing left to lose and said so plainly. He was overruled. He told me later that he had written the vote down himself in his personal record, with the names of every man who raised his hand, because he believed there would come a day when those names would matter. He was right. She was given 1 day to pack. She was given 2 wool blankets, a candle stub, a week's worth of travel provisions, and 4 guards who were instructed to deliver her to the settlement at Murren's Crossing and return without her. The settlement at Murren's Crossing was a frontier outpost at the northern edge of the Veldrath territories, a cluster of 23 buildings at the tree line of the Black Pine Forest, where the kingdom's edge blurred into the frozen wastes beyond. It existed to house border surveyors and a small pack of woodsmen who managed the timber rights in the region. It was not a prison. It was simply the furthest point from my court that still existed within my borders, and that was precisely why Lord Vane chose it. She left in the first week of true winter. The guards reported when they returned that she had not wept. She had asked no questions. She had walked the last mile of the journey herself, when one of the horses threw a shoe and the guards were preoccupied, and she had arrived at the settlement gate ahead of them and introduced herself to the settlement's headman without waiting for an escort. One of the guards, a young man named Petter, who was not Lord Vane's man and who told me all of this himself later, with something tight and uncomfortable in his face, said that she had looked back once, toward the south, before she walked through the gate, and then had not looked back again. I woke up on the 22nd day of winter. The first thing I was aware of was the weight of the blankets and the smell of pine resin and tallow from the candles they were burning to keep the room warm. The second thing I was aware of was that my wolf was not where he usually was in my chest, that steady, contained presence that I had carried so long I rarely noticed it, the way you stop noticing the sound of a river when you live beside one. He was still there, but he was different. He was oriented. He was pointed in a direction the way a compass needle is pointed, quietly and absolutely and without doubt, and the direction he was pointed was north. It took me 3 more days to be well enough to speak in full sentences. On the 4th day, Gareth brought me the garrison aide's notes, set them on the blanket beside me, and left the room without saying anything. He is that kind of man, Gareth. He understands when words are not useful. I read the notes. I read them twice. Then I lay still for a long time and looked at the pine resin ceiling of the garrison chamber, and thought about what it means to be a king, whose kingdom does things in his name, while he is unconscious and unable to prevent it. My wolf was pointed north. He had been pointed north since I woke. He did not surge or howl or rage. He was simply fixed on that direction with the patient, absolute certainty of a lodestone, and I understood, in the way I had understood it for the first time the night of the Autumn Council, when I had felt it like a warm hand pressed flat against my sternum in the middle of a room full of noise and politics, and the accumulated weight of 20 years of ruling, that she was what he was pointing toward. That she had always been what he was pointing toward. I had not told anyone about the Autumn Council night. I had not told Gareth, had not told my own wolf master, had not recorded it. I had felt it and held it carefully and privately, the way you hold something fragile before you know what to do with it, and in the interim my council had moved. They had moved in the dark, while I was unconscious and could not prevent it, and they had taken her north and left her at the edge of the frozen world. On the 5th day I told Gareth to prepare horses. He asked how many men. I said 6. He asked when. I said tomorrow before first light. He did not ask where. He already knew where. My wolf master is a very perceptive man. We rode north for 11 days. I will not pretend the riding was comfortable. The 3 heeled ribs ached in the cold in a way that made certain movements sharp and certain hours long. I did not mention this. There is a specific quality of embarrassment attached to being a king who got thrown from another man's horse on an icy road during what was supposed to be a minor skirmish, and I had no intention of adding complaint to it. What I will tell you about is what I learned on those 11 days, because the learning was the thing that mattered. On the 2nd day, we stopped at the garrison at Edris Hold itself, where I had spent 3 weeks in the recovery room. The garrison commander, a man named Asen who had served the northern border for 17 years and had therefore seen more than most men see and developed strong opinions about all of it, told me that Sierra Thornton had stopped at Edris Hold on her way north. The guards had stopped to rest the horses. She had been permitted into the garrison's common room for an hour. He said she had sat by the fire and drunk the cup of broth his cook brought her and thanked the cook by name. She had asked the cook's name, the garrison commander told me before she thanked her, because she thought it mattered to know a person's name before you thanked them. She had not complained about the cold, the road, or the circumstances. When the hour was up, she stood and thanked the garrison commander himself, and walked back out to the horses without being asked. The garrison commander told me all of this in a precise, factual voice, and then looked at me steadily for a moment and said, "She is a good woman, my Lord King." Not as a sentiment, as a report. I thanked him and we rode on. On the 5th day we passed through the village of Kethwarden, which is the last settled village before the Black Pine Forest begins, and the world narrows into the frontier track. The village headwoman, who had been headwoman of Kethwarden for 30 years and was therefore owed a great deal of respect, told me, unprompted, that a woman had passed through in midwinter on the council's directive, and that the woman had stopped to help reset a child's dislocated shoulder before she continued north because the village had no healer and the child was in pain, and the woman had seen this from the road. She had not been asked. She had simply stopped. The guards had waited with visible impatience, and she had ignored the visible impatience entirely and set the shoulder and shown the child's mother how to bind it, and then she had gotten back on her horse and ridden on. The headwoman told me this the same way the garrison commander had told me his part of it, factually, with her eyes steady on mine, with the specific quality of someone who has decided that a thing should be said and is saying it. I thanked her as well, and we rode on. My wolf said nothing through any of this. He was already pointed north. He had already known. These accounts were not information to him. They were confirmation of what he had understood the night of the autumn council, standing in that crowded room with all the candles burning, and all the lords of my kingdom talking to each other in their careful voices, when something behind my ribs had gone very quiet and very clear, and I had turned and seen her for the first time, standing at the edge of the hall, not at the center, as if she had not expected to be noticed and had arranged herself accordingly. She was listening to something old Lord Farron was saying. She was listening with her whole attention, the way very few people listen to very old men, because most people are only waiting for old men to finish. She was not waiting. She was actually listening, and Lord Farron, who had been listened to less and less as the years accumulated, was still talking, with something lighter in his old face than I had seen there in years. I had stood and watched this for a long moment. My wolf had gone still in a way that was not absence but recognition, like a man who has been looking for a word for a long time and finally finds it, and the word is simple and correct, and he cannot understand how he did not find it sooner. I had not spoken to her that night. I had been watching how Lord Vane was watching me, and I had understood that Lord Vane would catalogue whatever he observed and make use of it at the moment he judged most useful. I had been careful. I had spoken to her twice in the following weeks, once about the winter grazing permits for the Southern Territories, which she had come to court to petition on behalf of the former tenants of her father's lands, who had nowhere else to advocate for their interests. And once when I found her in the East Corridor helping a kitchen boy carry a load of firewood that had been dropped on the stairs, which was not a thing a lord's daughter was expected to do, and which she was doing without the faintest suggestion of performance, because the wood needed to be picked up and she was there. I had helped her. We had stood in the corridor with armloads of firewood, and talked for 20 minutes about the Eastern Pass grazing rights and the mathematics of border territory taxation, and I had understood, with the still clarity that my wolf had been pointing me toward since the council night, that I would have to be very careful indeed, because what I was feeling was not a thing that can be managed with caution forever. Then I had ridden east, and the horse had gone down on the ice, and everything after that had been Lord Vane's. On the 8th day, we entered the Black Pine Forest. I want you to understand what the Black Pine Forest is in midwinter. The trees are enormous, 60, 70 feet tall, their lower branches bare and black, their upper branches carrying snow like heavy gray mantles. The light comes through them at an angle, cold and thin, and the shadows between the trunks are very deep. The track narrows to the width of 2 horses and then 1 horse, and then a suggestion. The air smells of frozen resin and old ice and something clean and absolute that has no name. There are sounds, the creak of branches, the far-off percussion of something falling through snow, and long stretches of complete silence between those sounds. My 6 men rode without speaking. Gareth, who rides at my left always, was quiet in the specific way he is quiet when he is paying attention to everything. I was quiet because I had been quiet for 8 days and saw no reason to stop. My wolf was quiet because he was oriented, fixed, contained. He had nothing to say. The direction was north, and we were going north, and that was the whole of it. On the 9th day, we found the first border wolf. It was sitting in the middle of the track. This is not a thing border wolves do. Border wolves are wild, not domesticated, not bonded to any pack, not beholden to any king's authority. They run the territories of the Black Pine Forest and the frozen edges beyond it, and they are seen rarely and approached not at all. When a border wolf is seen, it is usually at a distance, moving between trees, and the appropriate response is to watch it go and be grateful you were not between it and wherever it was going. This one was sitting in the middle of the track and looking at us. Gareth put his hand up. We stopped. The wolf looked at us, at me specifically, with yellow eyes that were entirely without the feral edge I expected, with a directness that was almost conversational. And then it stood, turned, and walked north along the track, looking back once to see if we were following. We followed. It led us the rest of the way. By the 10th day, there were 3 wolves walking ahead of us. By the 11th day, when the track broke out of the tree line, and I saw the settlement at Murren's Crossing for the first time, a low cluster of stone and timber buildings behind a low stone wall, smoke coming from 6 chimneys, the frozen waste stretching flat and white beyond it. There were 6 wolves, walking in a loose formation ahead of our horses with a proprietary calm that was not aggression but something close to announcement, as if they were escorting us and wanted the settlement to know it. The gate stood open. The headman of the settlement, a wide, weathered man named Bram who had spent 15 years on the frontier and had the specific quality of a man who is no longer surprised by anything, was standing in the gateway watching us come. He looked at the wolves. He looked at me. He nodded as if this confirmed something he had already worked out. "My Lord King," he said. "Where is she?" I said. She was in the settlement's small hall. It was a long, low-ceilinged room with a stone floor and 4 tallow candles burning in iron holders on the central table, and a fire going in the hearth at the far end. The hall was used for settlement meetings and, in the deepest winter, for housing the settlement's animals in the worst nights. Today it smelled of pine smoke and tallow, and underneath those, something sharp and medicinal. There was a border wolf lying on a pallet near the hearth, a large one, its gray coat dull with the flatness of illness, its breathing audible from the doorway. And beside it, kneeling on the stone floor with no cushion between her knees and the cold, was Sira. She was examining the wolf's foreleg with both hands, her fingers working carefully along the joint, her attention entirely on the animal. She had not heard us come in, or she had heard us and had not stopped what she was doing, which I quickly understood was more likely. She was wearing the clothes she had brought north, a dark wool dress that had been mended at the left sleeve with slightly different thread, a heavy shawl pinned at the shoulder, boots that were not made for the frontier cold but had clearly been wrapped and waterproofed with something since she arrived. Her hair was up simply. She was kneeling on a stone floor in a frontier settlement at the edge of the frozen world, treating a wild animal that had no reason to trust her, and she looked exactly as she had looked in the east corridor helping the kitchen boy carry firewood. Like someone who had found the task that needed doing and was doing it, without any particular performance of the doing. I stood in the doorway for a moment and did not move. My wolf was silent. He was not silent the way he is silent when there is nothing to say. He was silent the way a river is silent when it finally reaches the sea, not the absence of sound, but the end of the long work of getting somewhere and the arrival. The wolf on the pallet lifted its head and looked at me. Its yellow eyes moved from me to Sierra and back again, with an expression that in a person I would have called recognition. She heard something in my stillness, or in Gareth's breath behind me, or in the wolves at the door who had followed us inside and arranged themselves along the wall without being asked. She looked up. She looked at me. Her face did not do what faces usually do when a king walks into a room, the sudden adjustment, the unconscious recalibration to a more formal arrangement of features. She simply looked at me. Her eyes, which were the particular gray of water in winter, were steady and very clear, and there was something in them that I recognized because I had felt it in my wolf since the council night, the quality of already knowing, not surprise, not relief, not performance of either. The quality of looking at something you have already understood and finding that understanding confirmed. I crossed the room. I was not aware of crossing it. I was aware of the stone floor and the tallow candles and the smell of the medicinal mixture she had been using on the wolf's leg, and then I was standing in front of her, and she was looking up at me from the floor where she knelt, and I was looking down at her, and there were perhaps 4 feet of cold air between us and nothing else. "You should not be kneeling on stone," I said. It was not what I had planned to say. It was not even close to what I had planned to say. She looked at me for a moment with an expression that was not quite amusement and not quite something else but lived between them. "The floor is the temperature of the wolf," she said. "He stays calmer if I'm at his level." I looked at the wolf on the pallet. The wolf on the pallet looked at me with its yellow eyes and then laid its head back down with a pointed lack of urgency, as if it had assessed me and found me present but not required. "How long has he been ill?" I said. "4 days," she said. "The joint was inflamed. It's better now." She sat back on her heels and looked at the wolf, the way she had looked at old Lord Farron that night in the council hall, with her whole attention, assessing quietly. Then she looked at me again. "How long have you been riding?" 11 days, I said. She absorbed this. "You should have waited," she said, "until the ribs were fully healed." "They are healed." "They are mostly healed," she said, with the specific tone of a person who has some knowledge of the subject and is not going to pretend otherwise for the sake of politeness. "You're holding your left side when you think no one is watching." Behind me, I was aware of Gareth carefully not making any sound at all. I said, "I would like you to stand up." She looked at me for another moment. Then she looked down at her hands, which were still lightly dusted with the dried mixture she had been working from. She pressed her palms against her skirt and stood. She was not as tall as I remembered, but I had been standing and she had been at the edge of a hall and there had been distance between us. Up close, in the narrow space of the settlement hall with the fire at her back and the tallow candles throwing warm light across her face, she was simply herself, clear and steady, and looking at me with the same directness the border wolves had used on the track, the directness of something that does not need to perform its own composure because it actually has it. I said, "I am going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it fully before you say anything." "All right," she said. "My wolf knew," I said, "the night of the autumn council. I have known since that night. I did not speak because I was watching Vane watch me and I thought there was time to be careful. I was wrong about the time and I will not be wrong about it again." I paused. "What was done to you was done in my name while I could not prevent it, and I am not asking you to receive that as an apology, because an apology is not sufficient. I am asking you to receive it as a fact that I intend to answer for, fully, in front of everyone who had a hand in it. She was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted in the hearth. The sick wolf exhaled, a long, slow sound. "You rode 11 days, she said. "Yes." "Through the worst midwinter in 20 years. "Yes." She looked at me, and in her eyes was the same thing I had seen when she looked up from the floor. Not surprise, not relief arranged for my benefit, but the simple, clear quality of confirmation, of something settling into its correct position. "I did not expect that," she said. "I thought—" She stopped. Began again, with the particular care of someone choosing accurate words over comfortable ones. "I thought it would be spring, perhaps, if it happened at all. I thought you would be fully recovered, and the road would be clear, and the council would have had time to arrange a better story about where I was and why." "The council," I said, "has had 11 days to arrange whatever story they like. I have had 11 days to become progressively less interested in what story they've arranged." I said, "I am going to name you now, Sira. Here in this room, before my men and whatever souls of this settlement will come to witness it. And in the spring, when the road is clear, I will take you south, and I will name you again in my own hall, before everyone who voted to send you here. You don't have to come south in spring if you don't want to. But I want the naming to happen now, in this room, because I am not going to ask you to live in uncertainty for one more day on my account." She said nothing immediately. She looked at me with those winter-gray eyes, steady and clear, and I waited, because she had earned the right to take whatever time she needed, and I was not going to rush her. Then she said, "The wolf's leg will need to be checked tomorrow morning." "I'll send Gareth," I said. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the approach of one. "All right," she said. Bram, the settlement headman, had 40 years of frontier life behind him and therefore understood, when I asked him to gather whoever was present in the settlement, that this was not a request that required explanation. He gathered them efficiently. There were 31 souls at Murren's Crossing that midwinter. The headman and his wife, 14 woodsmen and their families, 4 border surveyors who had been snowbound for 3 weeks, a settlement physician who was also the school teacher, 2 young men who were apprenticing in the timber work, and 6 others who had come north for various frontier-adjacent reasons and stayed. Gareth stood at my right. My 6 men stood in a half-circle. The border wolves, there were now 8 of them, the 6 who had walked us in and 2 more who had appeared from somewhere in the settlement as if they had been waiting for this moment, arranged themselves along the walls and the doorway with the composed authority of creatures who understood exactly what was happening and had opinions about it. Sira stood before me. She had not changed her clothes or rearranged her hair. She was wearing the mended dress with the different thread at the sleeve and the waterproofed boots and the heavy shawl pinned at her shoulder, and she stood with her hands quietly at her sides and her spine exactly straight, and she looked like what she was, a woman who had come north with 2 blankets and a candle stub, and had not broken, not once, not for a single day. I said to the assembled souls of Murren's Crossing, "What I am about to tell you is true, and it is final, and it does not require the confirmation of any council or any lord or any authority other than the one standing in front of you. My wolf chose this woman the night of the autumn council. The choosing is absolute. She is my mate and my Luna, and she will be recognized as such by every person, every pack, and every territory within the Veldrath kingdom from this moment forward. What was done to her, the exile, the diminishment, the sending away, was done without my knowledge or consent while I was unable to speak, and it will be answered for." I paused. I looked at Sira. "I am asking her to accept this, publicly, in this room, so that she does not have to accept it in silence or in private any longer." The hall was quiet. The fire in the hearth said what fires say. One of the border wolves shifted its weight against the wall. Sira looked at me for a moment. Then she did something I had not expected. She looked around the room at the headman and his wife, at the woodsmen and the surveyors, at the physician schoolteacher, at the young timber apprentices, with the same full attention she had given old Lord Farron in the council hall. not performing a survey, actually seeing them, acknowledging that they were witnesses and that witnesses matter and that she was grateful for them. Then she looked back at me, and she put her hand in mine. Not hesitantly, not as a performance of acceptance. The way you put your hand into the hand of someone you have already decided to trust, in the matter-of-fact way of someone who has made a decision and is enacting it without drama. Her hand was cold from the frontier and slightly rough from the work she had been doing, and it was the most certain thing I had held in 20 years of ruling a kingdom. My wolf settled. That is the only word for it. He had been oriented and pointed and fixed on this direction since the council night, and now he settled like a compass finding north, not moving anymore, not needing to, because north is here. The border wolves all lay down at the same moment, every one of them. It happened without sound, without drama. They simply folded down along the walls, 8 of them, and looked at us with their yellow eyes, and the hall was very quiet with the weight of it. Bram, the headman, put his fist to his chest in the old frontier gesture of acknowledgement. His wife did the same. The woodsmen followed one by one, the surveyors, the physician, the apprentices, every soul in the room. "Thank you," Sira said to the room, not to me, still herself, still giving full attention to the people who deserved it. I sent the summons south that same evening, by the 2 fastest riders I had. The summons was addressed to Lord Edric Vane, Lord Caron of the Eastern Holdings, Lord Breton of the Sea Territories, and Lord Mays of the Central Pack, the 4 lords who had voted to exile her. It was also addressed to Lord Farron of the Western Marches, who had voted against it, and who I wanted present because he had earned the right to see what followed. The summons said they were to come north to Murren's Crossing to witness the formal naming of Sira Thornton as Luna of Veldrath, and it gave them 21 days to arrive. The 21 days was not generosity. The road north in midwinter takes at minimum 12 days in good conditions. 21 days gave them just enough time to make the journey if they left immediately, and not a single comfortable day to spend in their warm halls considering whether they wanted to come. They all came. Even Lord Vane, who I think understood, as the careful, intelligent man he was, that the choice between coming to Murren's Crossing and not coming to Murren's Crossing was not actually a choice he could make freely anymore. Those 21 days at Murren's Crossing are not what this accounting is about, and I will not give them more space than they are owed. But I want to say a few things about them, because they matter. Sira continued to treat the sick wolf for the first 3 days, until his leg was healed. He left on the 4th day and came back on the 6th with 3 others, and after that there were always wolves outside the settlement in the early mornings, sitting in the snow at a comfortable distance, watching the place. Bram told me this was new. The wolves had been seen near the settlement before, but they had not sat in the mornings watching it. He said it with the factual tone of a man reporting a change in weather patterns, not alarmed, simply noting it. She spent time with the settlement's people in a way that I watched and did not interfere with, because it did not need interference. She helped the settlement physician catalog the winter medical supplies and noted what was depleted and what they would need before the spring resupply. She taught the timber apprentices a method of rope wrapping for cold-weather tool handles that she had learned, she said, from her father's ground manager, who had managed agricultural tools in the mountain territories for 30 years. She sat with Bram's wife and helped sort the seed stock that had come in the autumn resupply for the spring planting, and she could apparently identify varieties of grain by sight and smell, which Bram's wife found both surprising and enormously useful. She was not performing generosity. She simply saw what needed doing and did it, the way she had seen the child's dislocated shoulder at Kethwarden and stopped, the way she had seen the kitchen boys dropped firewood in the corridor and picked it up. There was no difference in her between the things she did for the settlement and the things she would presumably do for a court. She found the work and did it, and the question of whether the setting was grand enough for her attention never seemed to occur to her. In the evenings, after the settlement's work was done and the fire was low, we talked. I want to record that, because it will not appear anywhere in the official account of these events, and it matters to me that it is recorded somewhere. We talked about everything. About the eastern border territories and what the taxation structure was doing to the small holders who couldn't absorb the winter levy. About the old grazing permit system and its accumulated inconsistencies. About what she had found in the seed stock and what the settlement's spring planting might reasonably yield. About Lord Farron, who had voted against the exile motion, and what she thought his reasons had been. She had opinions about all of it. Precise, well-reasoned opinions expressed in the specific voice of someone who has thought seriously about a thing and also understands the limits of what she can know from the outside. She did not tell me what to decide. She told me what she saw and why she saw it, and left the deciding where it belonged. My wolf in those evenings was the stillest I have ever known him to be. Not dormant, simply at rest in the way he had never been before, the way I had not understood was possible before now, the rest of something that has arrived where it was always going. On the 18th day, the first of the lords appeared on the southern track. It was Lord Farron, which did not surprise me. He was 81 years old and had ridden 11 days through midwinter to be present, and he arrived at the settlement gate with the specific bearing of a man who knows he has done the correct thing and intends to be present for the consequences of it. "My Lord King," he said from the back of his horse. "Lord Farron," I said. "Thank you for coming." "I voted against it," he said, with the directness of a man who has been waiting 19 days to say this in person. "I know," I said. "I read the record." He looked at me with his old eyes, which had seen 4 administrations and were going to see the consequences of this one now, in the snow at the edge of the world. "Good," he said, and dismounted, and went inside. Lords Vane, Karen, Breton, and Mays arrived on the 20th day. They arrived together, which was either coincidence or strategy, and it did not matter which. They rode in through the settlement gate with their retinues. Together, they had brought perhaps 30 men, which was more than necessary for a journey and probably felt like safety. And they stopped before me in the settlement's central yard, where the snow had been cleared and the settlement's people stood watching. Lord Vane looked at me. He was a careful man, and he had spent 21 days thinking carefully about this moment, and he had the look of someone who has prepared several things to say and is trying to determine which of them is appropriate. He said, "My Lord King, we came at your summons." "You did," I said. "I will speak with each of you privately later. For now, I want you to witness something." I had not asked Sira whether she wanted to be present for this. I had asked her separately in the evenings what she wanted, not from the lords, not from the proceeding, but from her life in the South, when we returned. She had told me, with the same precise clarity she brought to everything. She wanted to continue the petition work she had been doing on behalf of her father's former tenants. She wanted access to the kingdom's agricultural records, which she believed contained systematic problems in the smallholder taxation that were compounding every winter. She wanted to work. She had said this last part without apology and without explanation, the way you say a true thing about yourself to someone you trust, not to make it smaller. I had told her she would have all of it. She was standing now at the doorway of the settlement hall, in the same mended dress with the different thread at the sleeve, with the heavy shawl pinned at her shoulder. The border wolves, there were 11 of them now, were arranged in the yard around her position, not crowding, simply present. A loose perimeter of gray and tawny bodies sitting in the snow with their yellow eyes on the assembled men of the South. Lord Vane looked at the wolves. He said nothing. I said, "On the 21st day of midwinter, in the settlement at Murren's Crossing, I named Sira Thornton my Luna, before the witnesses of this settlement and before these wolves. I am naming her again now before you so that there is no ambiguity in the record and no version of this event that does not include your presence at the naming." I paused. "You will bow to her, not to me, to her, as is appropriate for the Luna of Veldrath." Lord Vane was a careful man. He had been careful for 40 years. He looked at Sira in her mendied dress and her frontier boots in the doorway of the settlement hall, and then he bent his knee. Lord Karen followed. Lord Breton. Lord Mays. One by one, in the cleared snow of the frontier yard, with the border wolves watching and the settlement's people watching and Lord Farron watching from beside the gate with something in his old face that was not quite satisfaction and not quite vindication, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Lord Farron did not bow. He was 81 years old and I had not asked him to. He caught my eye across the yard and nodded once, with the gravity of a man who has just seen a 40-year investment in being correct pay its returns. Sira looked at the kneeling lords for a moment. Then she looked at me. Her face was exactly as it had been in the settlement hall the day I arrived, clear, steady, winter-gray eyes with the quality of confirmation. Then she walked out of the doorway and crossed the yard to where I stood, and she took my hand, the same way she had taken it in the settlement hall. Not as performance, not as ceremony, but as decision. The road south took 12 days and was not comfortable. My ribs had been accurate about themselves, mostly healed, which is a different thing from fully healed, and the cold did what cold does to things that are mostly healed. I did not mention this. Sira, who had apparently been accurate about the mostly, said nothing either, which was its own form of courtesy. On the third day south we stopped at Kethwarden, and she went to check on the child, whose shoulder she had reset on the way north. The shoulder had healed correctly. She spoke to the mother for 20 minutes about the binding method and when to stop using it. I stood in the doorway of the house and watched her and said nothing, and thought about the enormous, uncomplicated simplicity of what she was doing. Simply following the thing she had already started, the thread of care she had laid down 2 months ago without thinking about whether anyone would notice. On the 6th day south we stopped at Edris Hold. The garrison commander, Asen, stood in the garrison yard and looked at her with the expression of a man whose original assessment has been confirmed in the most definitive possible way. He looked at me once, briefly, and then back at her, and then he put his fist to his chest. "Welcome, my Lady Luna," he said. She thanked him, by name before she thanked him. On the 11th day, when we were within a day's ride of the capital, she asked me something she had apparently been carrying for the journey and had decided was finally the right time. She asked, what had I felt the night of the autumn council? She asked it simply, without preamble, the way she asked everything. She had been thinking about it, she said, about the specific mechanism. She had felt something that night too, something she had not had a frame for at the time, something she had set aside because the frame was not available to her, and she was not a woman who spent time on things that had no available frame. But she wanted to know what it had been, what it was called, what it meant in terms of the wolf pack order she did not grow up inside. I told her what the mate bond is, in my people's understanding of it, the recognition of the wolf, not an emotion that happens to you, but a knowledge that your wolf has arrived at before you have, the way a hunting animal knows the direction of water before it can smell it, the certainty underneath the feeling, the orientation that does not ask permission. She was quiet for a moment, listening the way she listened to everything. Then she said, "That is what it was. Yes, I thought something was wrong with me that winter." "Nothing was wrong with you," I said. "I know that now," she said, with the specific equanimity of a person who has had time and isolation in which to work out what they know. "I had a long time to think at Murren's Crossing. I'm sorry for that." She turned to look at me on the road with those winter-gray eyes. "Don't be sorry," she said. "I needed the time. Not because I doubted anything. I stopped doubting the thing in the settlement hall the first evening when I understood what the wolves were doing at the door. I needed the time because I had to decide what I wanted, separate from the circumstances. What I actually wanted, as opposed to what the circumstances were offering." She paused. "I do not want to be a Luna who came from an exile and never fully arrived." "You have arrived," I said. "I know," she said. That's what I decided at Murren's Crossing, that I would arrive completely, that I would do the work properly, that I would not spend the rest of my life being the woman who was exiled and then returned. I would simply be present doing the work, the way I was doing the work at Murren's Crossing. She looked ahead at the road. It's the same work, just in a larger hall. I should tell you what happened with the council. Lord Vane resigned his council seat in the spring, before I removed him. It was a careful move, and he made it carefully, and I accepted it because I had decided that the accounting Lord Vane owed was not a public one. His accounting was the loss of the thing he had spent 40 years accumulating, the influence, the centrality, the careful architecture of his position, and he understood this without me having to say it, and in some ways that understanding was more complete than anything I could have imposed. He retired to his family holdings. I understand he is there still, and that he is careful there, in the careful way of a man who has finally run out of larger rooms to be careful in. Lords Karen, Breton, and Mays lost their council seats in the formal review that followed the spring naming ceremony. New council seats were filled in part from the recommendation Sira had made about the smallholder taxation problem she had found in the agricultural records, which she had been working through for 6 weeks by the time the review was complete, with the systematic attention of a person who has been waiting for access to a problem that needed solving. The records were worse than she had suggested they might be. The corrections were substantial. The small holders in the Eastern and Central Territories, who had been losing winter viability for 3 consecutive years, had their levies restructured in the spring. It was not a dramatic change, viewed from the outside. It was the kind of change that means a family does not lose their holding in the 3rd difficult winter, which is not dramatic from a distance and is total from close up. Lord Farron of the Western Marches was at the spring naming ceremony. He sat in the front row and watched everything with his old eyes and said very little, which for Lord Farron at 81 was a form of eloquence. After the ceremony, when the hall was full of the ordinary noise of a large formal occasion, and Sira was being addressed by a receiving line of people who had come to be introduced, he made his way to where I was standing and looked at me with the steadiness of a man who has outlasted most of the things that seemed permanent and learned something from the outlasting. "She's good," he said, the same way the garrison commander had said it, as a report, not a sentiment. "She is," I said. "You nearly lost her," he said. "I know." "Don't nearly lose her again," he said, and went back to his seat. The spring naming ceremony was public and formal, and attended by every lord, every pack representative, and every settlement headman in the Veldrath territories. I will not detail it here, because it was formal and public, and the record is elsewhere, and what matters about it is only what was present in it. She wore the Luna's cord in its traditional colors, and she wore it over the same style of dress she wore always, practical, modest, with nothing borrowed from ceremony that wasn't already hers, and she received the acknowledgement of the assembled lords with the same full attention she gave to everything, looking at each person as a person, and not as a rank or a symbolic gesture. She gave a brief address, which she had written herself and which was characteristically exact. She spoke about the Eastern Territories' smallholder situation and what would change in the summer taxation cycle, and she spoke about the settlement at Murren's Crossing and what it needed from the spring resupply, and she thanked Lord Farron by name, with the specific reason for the thanks stated plainly, so that there was a record of it. It was not the address anyone had expected. It was completely her. What I want to finish with is not the ceremony and not the political accounting and not the official record. The official record is a document and will outlast me in the way documents do, accumulated in the archive with all the other documents of all the other administrations, waiting for the historians. What I want to finish with is this. The morning we rode out of Murren's Crossing with Sira beside me, the border wolves ran alongside us for 6 miles, 11 of them. I told you this at the beginning, and now I want to tell you the rest of it. When they stopped and sat at the edge of the tree line, I finally looked at her. We had reined in, and she had turned in her saddle to look back at them, at the 11 gray and tawny shapes sitting in a line in the snow, watching us go with their yellow eyes. She looked at them for a long moment with the full attention quality she gave to things that deserved it. Then she turned back to the road and she said, very quietly, "I'm going to miss them." "They'll be there when you come back," I said. She looked at me. Something in her face shifted, the approach of something warm, arriving the way warmth arrives in a room where a fire has just been lit, not sudden but certain. "We'll come back," she said. "Murren's Crossing needs a Luna who knows the seed stock and the border wolf health patterns and the rope wrapping method for cold weather tools," I said. "I expect we'll be back every winter." The something warm arrived completely, and it settled in her face the way my wolf had settled when she put her hand in mine in the settlement hall. Not dramatically, but finally, with the quality of a long-pointed thing that has found its direction and stopped needing to search. "All right," she said, and turned south, and we rode. Behind us, 11 wolves sat in the snow and watched us go, patient as the black pine forest, patient as the winter, patient as everything that has already arrived where it was always going.